Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to dig into some interesting business news.
Well, today we're looking at a story that has major implications, especially for businesses operating in Europe. We're talking about TikTok.
TikTok. Always seems to be in the headlines these days.
Right, so get this. TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, is setting aside a massive amount of money.
Oh, yeah, I saw that headline. Something like $1 billion, right?
Yep, you heard that right, $1 billion.
Hmm.
And they're earmarking it to potentially cover fines related to data protection in Europe.
Wow. That's a serious chunk of change. What's going on over there?
Well, that's what we're going to unpack today. What does this move mean for TikTok? What does it mean for other businesses operating in the EU? And what can we learn from this whole situation?
Sounds like a good plan. I mean, $1 billion, that's not chump change. That's got to be a strategic move on ByteDance's part.
Exactly. So, first things first, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the
Yeah.
GDPR.
Right, the General Data Protection Regulation, it's kind of a big deal in Europe.
It's basically Europe's super strict data privacy law, and it sets a really, really high bar for how companies handle user data.
And it has some pretty hefty penalties for companies that don't comply, which is probably what ByteDance is trying to get ahead of.
Exactly. And what makes this situation even more interesting is that the potential fines are specifically related to how TikTok handles the data of children, minors.
Yeah, that's where things get even trickier, right? Children's data is treated with extra care under GDPR, and for good reason. I mean, you've got to be really careful about what you're collecting, how you're using it, and who you're sharing it with.
Totally. And the fact that ByteDance is putting aside $1 billion, it really sends a message. Like, this isn't just a slap on the wrist. This is serious business.
Absolutely. This is a clear signal to other companies. Ignoring data protection in Europe can be very costly.
Like, really costly. $1 billion costly.
Yeah.
But you know what I find interesting? ByteDance is actually being proactive here. They're setting aside these funds before any specific fine has been levied.
Right. It's kind of a smart move, actually. It shows they're taking compliance seriously. It might even help them mitigate future penalties.
Maybe they're hoping to score some brownie points with regulators.
Perhaps. It definitely shows a willingness to play ball. And, from a business perspective, this highlights something really important: the increasing financial burden of complying with data protection regulations.
Right. It's not just a legal issue anymore, it's a financial one too.
Exactly. So companies need to factor these potential costs into their strategies, and not just companies in Europe, by the way.
Good point. This is a global trend.
Data protection is becoming a major concern worldwide. So even if you're not operating in Europe right now, pay attention. These trends tend to ripple outwards.
That's a really good point. And, beyond just the financial penalties, there's the whole issue of reputation.
Oh, absolutely. Reputational damage from a data breach or privacy violation can be devastating. Think about it. You lose customer trust, brand loyalty takes a hit. In the long run, that can be way more costly than any fine.
So let's bring it all home. What's the big takeaway for our listeners today?
Simple. Data protection is non-negotiable. It's a core business consideration, especially if you're operating globally or dealing with sensitive user data.
And being proactive is key, like ByteDance. Maybe not to the tune of $1 billion, but definitely taking steps to understand and adapt to these evolving regulations. It's not just about avoiding fines. It's about building trust with your users.
Couldn't agree more. And you know what I think is really interesting? Think about the future. Will this TikTok situation influence data privacy regulations and enforcement on a global scale? Could it push countries like the US towards federal-level privacy laws? What happens if we end up with a mishmash of different regulations in different regions? Lots of questions to ponder, right?
Lots of questions indeed. Thanks for breaking all this down. Really insightful, as always.
My pleasure. Always happy to dive deep into these issues.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on another deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and keep those business brains buzzing.